All right, welcome back everyone. Thanks for sticking with us. This is our last session for today. So we are going to talk about fee for service. We know that just different revenue streams are really important for all of you for nonprofits, and it's always helpful to hear what other people are doing. So we have three organizations that are going to share: Canopy, KYCC, and the Crew. Clarissa, Catherine, and Jennifer. So I think we're going to spotlight those three folks, and we'll just jump right in once we get them up on our screens. There we go. There's Clarissa. So we're going to do a few questions for the panelists, and then we're going to open it up to questions for all of you. So we're going to start off by just asking each of the panelists to introduce yourselves and share what kind of fee-for-service model you have and about what percentage of your revenue it makes up. So Clarissa, do you want to kick us off?
Sure, yeah. My name is Clarissa Boyajian, and I'm the Environmental Services Manager with KYCC based in Los Angeles. So a huge portion of what we do is urban forestry. We have some other beautification work that we do as well. And we're serving central and the northern part of South LA. So we're right in the middle of the city, right in some of those really built up areas with very low canopy coverage percentages. And so the model that we have, much of our funding does come from state grants. We're getting it's about under a third of our revenue for the urban forestry work that we do is fees for service based. That's a higher percentage because we are part of the City Plants Collaborative. So any of the city funding we have to do the free street tree planting and the yard tree giveaways is funded through the Department of Water and Power, is a fee for service model. We also we have some contracts with other nonprofits that are smaller and maybe don't have crews and could host volunteer events but don't have the capacity to be able to also have a higher number planted by crews as well. We've got some contract with those folks. We have contracts with the city. There's some city departments that get CAL FIRE grants. And again, they have administrative staff. They don't have those field crews to really be able to increase the number of trees in addition to the volunteer work they're doing. So we have contracts with them. We've done some contracts, not just to plant trees, but also to care for trees with local business improvement districts and other neighborhood councils, those sorts of groups. So it's sort of a wide variety of who we're contracting with. And it really does mean that how many trees we're planting or caring for, can go from anywhere from like 10 up to 600. So it's a pretty big range in terms of how big or small those contracts are. And then we also are working on expanding our corporate work, so hosting volunteer events so that corporate groups that are part of the community can give back in that way as well.
Great, thank you. Catherine, do you want to go next?
Sure. Thank you very much, Sarah and Clarissa. Actually, the situation at Canopy is very similar to what Clarissa described. Our fee-for-service are mainly city and one county contract, and they represent about a third of our funding. So Canopy is based in the San Francisco Bay Area, specifically in the Mid-Peninsula. And our service area goes from some communities in San Mateo County down to some south to communities in Santa Clara County. We work primarily in East Palo Alto, Mountain View, and unincorporated areas of what is generally known as Redwood City, and also in some areas of Menlo Park. So we have city contracts with the city of Palo Alto, the city of Mountain View, and the city of East Palo Alto, basically. The city of East Palo Alto is the community for which we have the smallest city contract, because most of our work there is funded by CAL FIRE grants and also by restricted funding that we fundraise for.
Great, thank you. And then Jennifer, you're up last.
Hey, good morning, everybody. So I'm the director of the crew, and we are based here in Ojai, and our teams serve basically all of Ventura County and parts of Santa Barbara County as well. And the crew is about 30 years old. It's just a pretty straightforward youth conservation corps, and fee for service has really been at the base of the model for 30 years. And so you know, looking back over the history of the org, I would say that fee for service has been anywhere from 50 to 90% of our revenue, just depending on whether other kinds of granted projects might be in the mix. But it's always been a very high percentage, with a much smaller percentage of like philanthropic support and then some grant work. The main services that we provide through fee for service are trails, a lot of trails work, and a lot of we're in fuel reduction season. So there's a lot of fuel management and wildfire prevention work that happens over this 2-3 month period. And really where we see fee for service for us is we come alongside a lot of different organizations, cities, different municipal agencies, county parks, land conservation agencies, and we come alongside them in lots of different ways to do the work where volunteer engagement is not quite as reliable. Kind of like you can get volunteers to do all the really fun stuff, but there's a lot of other environmental work that needs to happen too, and that's typically where we come in. And so yeah, I'd say our partners are a really big mix of public, private, different landholders. We do a lot of work with ranchers as well in our area because it's a big agricultural region. So yeah, a little bit of all of the above.
Great, thank you. And now we'll just go in the same order, and if you all could share. Some of you already said how long how long you've been doing those services, but if you haven't already, you could say that. And then when you were setting up those contracts, or do you have any advice about some key early steps to building those relationships and getting fee for service contracts? So we'll start with you again, Clarissa.
Yeah, I think you know, I mentioned we have a sort of a wide variety of who we're contracting with and what those contracts are. And so it's a little bit, each contract's a little bit different. In terms of the smaller, more community-based groups that we have contracts with, I think the most important piece of that is building those relationships, is going to meetings, listening to where people are. You know, I think we've talked about this on this retreat earlier as well. Not everyone's ready for trees, right? And so being able to meet folks where they are and just be there and ready to respond when they have a need. Maybe it's just starting out by answering a few small questions about, you know, this is happening in our community around trees, like who do I talk to? Being able to help direct them, especially in Los Angeles, we're a very large city. It's a very complicated urban forestry landscape. And so starting there so that then when, you know, they do come across some funding or do have, you know, they're like, really want to plant trees here, we've got the money for it. I think a lot of those smaller contracts we've gotten those because folks have gotten used to us being the people who they can ask questions to. And then sometimes we're the people who are able to do the work as well. The larger contracts, and some of that in LA, I think in some ways we're really lucky. We have a collaborative of nonprofits that are all part of the contract with the city. So we're not any one of us individually having to do that by ourselves. So I think that's another thing too, especially in areas that are physically larger, is looking around and seeing who are the other nonprofits who are doing the same work. How can you work together? You know, we have different parts of the city that we work in, which I think makes us able to respond to those community needs a little bit better with those contracts. So I think working together. So I mean, ultimately, I think it really comes down to building relationships. Who else is doing the work? Where is the community? And figuring out how to make sure that you can spend that time building those relationships, which can be hard sometimes because, you know, funding pays for us to plant a tree. It doesn't necessarily pay for us to do all of the work that we need to do to talk to people, to get people excited about a tree in front of their house, or to talk to other groups, to be able to make those connections, which is part of, for us at least, part of the reason we are looking at expanding the corporate work that we're doing, to really be able to fill in some of those gaps so that we can do that relationship building as much as we know we really need to.
Nice. Yeah, thank you.
I'll go next, Sarah, if I may.
Mm-hmm.
Well, you know, a lot of what Clarissa said applies also in the case of Canopy, so I'm glad that I don't have to repeat it. One thing that I will say, though, is that we are fortunate to be an organization that was started 25 years ago by the city of Palo Alto itself, with an initial contract that allowed Canopy to be founded and to start the work. And we've had a contract with the city of Palo Alto ever since the founding, and it has ebbed and flowed, obviously. Sometimes it was small, very small, and then it became larger. I think really what's important is when you're building those relationships, you have to really focus on what can you offer to help with some of those decision makers' goals. So what can you offer in terms of sustainability, in terms of climate readiness, in terms of public health, etc. And one slide that Jackie showed that made me smile at some point was this slide where, with all of the projects that the city of Sacramento is working on right now, and how, you know, tiring and draining it can be for communities to be asked to participate in all of those projects. However, you know, knowing when the general plan is being updated, the SCAP is being created, the green infrastructure plan is being put together, knowing that cycle and plugging in and having allies in all of the commissions or on the city council, that's how you eventually will get a contract with the city. If you can propose a scope of work that will help with the goals that you have helped actually define in those foundational documents.
Yeah, that's so key. And yeah, I love connecting back to Jackie was talking about, really good opportunities for us as organizations to come to the city and say, we'll help you with these goals that you have. Okay, Jennifer.
Oh, this is great. I mean, it's kind of fun going last because it's like, okay, you've said all the things. This is ditto and good to go. And I guess, you know, the only thing I would add then is, you know, I find it really helpful to think about, I kind of have two major hats that I put on, and one is my nonprofit hat, and all of the usual kind of ways to approach the way that we do life through that lens. And then the other is I often think of the crew as a social business. So when I'm looking at our fee for service kind of work and the way that we set up contracts, I think of it as that social business lens. And so just like any business, you know, yes, you're looking at what are you good at? What can you offer and follow through on and really build a solid reputation? You just start with where you are. start with the skills that you already have, or the skills that are maybe just kind of close, and bring those in and then build from there. And it's also really wonderful because you have this, we all have this mission side as well. So kind of those are both different avenues to reach out, to build those relationships, both the mission side and the sort of business. You have a need, we can fulfill it. Let's make a contract. And I find that it makes us very versatile in that way when we're making those business contracts, because people hire us because we have skills, but they also hire us because they fall in love with the mission. And so having both those pieces together is really pretty valuable.
That's great. Okay, we'll switch up the order for the last question. Give Clarissa a break from going first. And that question is just, what's a lesson you all learned along the way that you think would be valuable for other groups looking to start or grow fee-for-service models? Something that you didn't expect, a benefit, a challenge of having fee-for-service. Catherine, do you want to start us off this time?
I'll try. Well, one thing that I will say is that it is difficult to talk about contracting with cities during COVID without mentioning the real challenges that city budgets are facing. So I would say if you have a contract with the city, even if it's small, just maintaining that contract should be your priority, because my experience is that in this context, like in any economic slowdown context or Great Recession, it's going to be difficult to enter into new contracts, I should say, to enter into new contract anytime very soon. However, you can work on your relationships, but just make sure to deliver on the existing contract. And that's been difficult also with COVID, when, for a pretty extended period of time, we could not even do the work that would allow us to invoice those contracts. But that should be the priority, I think, while you're also doing that relationship cultivation, advocacy work, and engage your board in that relationship building. Not everything has to be done by the staff. Actually, board members are very adept at that usually, and also they get an ear from the decision makers. It's not the same as if a staff member approaches them.
That's a really good tip. Jennifer, how about you?
Well, like kind of everybody, a little over a year ago, we were asking ourselves there's a lot of anxiety, a lot of, are we going to be okay? What's going to happen this coming year? What's going to happen with our different partners, et cetera. And, interestingly, like one of our vulnerabilities is we almost, at times have had almost too much fee for service, which I know sounds weird, but it's like basically a greater diversity of funding sources, a greater diversity of partners is a strength. And so, I think that's just been a learning curve for the organization as a whole over its history, where is the best kind of mix and diversity of partners. And so when I say that we almost had too much fee for service, that puts us in a vulnerability of being sort of reliant on those contracts and reliant on keeping those relationships going. Programmatically, it's been a huge strength for us to actually add writing our own grants and being more of a leader on our own grants, as opposed to being sort of a subcontractor on other people's projects. And so I know that's kind of maybe might be unusual in the room, but basically, yeah, the take home was just that diversity and keeping it really solid without spreading ourselves too thin. So yeah, that's
good.
That's
No matter how,
especially this last year, diversity was like the big.
No matter how good any one funding source is, diversity is always really strong. Yeah. And Clarissa?
Yeah, I would agree that definitely thinking about diversifying those funding sources, but also making sure that as you do that, the work still lines up with the staff resources that you have, especially if some of the fee for service that you're doing is caring for that first establishment care for trees. I think we've sometimes found, when you plant a tree, you go out once and the tree is planted. If you're caring for the tree, that's a much more of a puzzle in terms of scheduling, those sorts of things. So really making sure that your puzzle pieces are all going to fit together is something to think about. I know one thing that we've come up with too on some of these multi-year contracts is making sure that when we're bidding for the costs, we're really thinking about, we're still going to be doing this 3 years down the line, 5 years down the line. We're looking at 3 to 5 years of establishment care in Los Angeles. Is the rate per tree that we're initially talking about going to still be covering our costs in 3 years? Is a really important thing to think about. And then, the corporate work we're doing, it's a little bit different because it's not a fee to plant a specific fee to plant a tree or a specific fee to take care of a tree. It's a fee to host a volunteer event. But really keeping in mind that in those situations, groups are using our brand, our connection to the community to allow them to give back. And so making sure that we're thinking about the value of that as well, because we work really hard on that and we shouldn't just be giving that away for free.
I think that's such a great point. Just knowing, and that's just like a reoccurring theme in the fee for service, just like all nonprofits knowing their value and really owning that when setting fees and in your brand being part of that.
Well, and especially too, just to add, our indirect costs aren't always covered fully by some of the other things that we're applying for. And so, if we're working with a nonprofit versus if we're working with a corporate group, we're maybe going to think a little bit differently about what resources do they have available and adjust our fees based on that. But fee for service is an opportunity for us to make sure that all of those costs that are true costs in doing the work are covered.
Yeah, that's really great. All right, folks, if you have any questions, we have about 10 more minutes here. So just want to open it up to the group. You can go ahead and enter questions in the chat.
There was one in the chat from Cindy.
Oh yeah, I think we
did we cover that?
We covered a lot of it, but we can touch back and see if there's anything else to expand on. Cindy asked, how hard was it to work with cities to set up the contracts? What tips do you have on how to approach cities, and what are the pitfalls or unexpected issues? Are there any pitfalls or unexpected issues we didn't cover?
One thing that I can add is beware of prevailing wages when you enter into contracts with the city. So for instance, for Canopy, our contract with the city of Palo Alto includes the fact that for any field work, tree plantings in particular, the majority of the work is actually performed by volunteers. Otherwise, we run afoul of prevailing wages, and we couldn't do that activity. So it's a detail, but I think it's important to discuss with your city partners, for instance.
That's a great one. I know that's a recurring thing that's come up with different people's grant projects and things too, with prevailing wage. Anyone else? I'm trying to think if we had any other questions that came up when I chatted with you all, or do you have any questions for each other too?
Well, yeah, actually I do. I was very interested, Clarissa, on the funding you're getting from the water and power utility in the city. Can you just talk a little more about this?
Yeah, so in Los Angeles, we have a collaboration of nonprofits, and what we plant street trees, And then we're also able to give away trees for folks to plant in their yards themselves. And it's funded through the Department of Water and Power, the power side of the Department of Water and Power. So the goal is that trees are being planted where they will shade inhabited buildings and lower energy use and help to cool the city in that way. That's a contract that, similarly to what you were saying, where you've had this contract with the city of Palo Alto for a long time. This has been a contract within the city of Los Angeles. We're probably at a decade plus at this point that's been around. But it is one of the, in terms of city funding, it's one of the largest funders for urban forestry work. And
Yeah. Sorry,
you know,
it makes so much sense, right? And I know that Sacramento Tree Foundation has a similar contract with SMUD.
Yeah, our back in the day when this was first started, it was modeled after Sac Tree Foundation and what they were doing up there. And I think has in a lot of ways been really, really successful in being able to get more trees planted throughout the city.
Yes, so it works well also when the city has its own utility and you don't depend on a bankrupt PG&E, for instance. But you know, in the case of Canopy, I will say that pretty much none of our contract with the city is funded by the utilities department, although it is an independent utilities department. And it's really a matter of not the utilities department not willing to understand what they're getting from the urban forest as it already exists in terms of benefits, you know, regarding power consumption.
Yeah. The corporate volunteer days, I think, are a really great thing for a lot of people to think about. I know in LA and in the Bay Area, maybe have like more corporations than a lot of our network members have, but even for smaller companies, I think that could be a cool model to follow, especially since, Clarissa, you talked about you can build in a lot of expenses there that help pay for gaps in other areas of your work. Do you all have any tips for that and how you've been building that out?
Connected to Arbor Day Foundation. They are really, really helpful when it comes to that. You know, we're working on building it out so we can be working with even more groups, but a lot of this work has come from us partnering with them and them being able to, when folks are wanting to do work in LA, connect us when the project and the corporation matches up.
Oh, that's great. So connect with Matt, who's on the call with us today.
And I know we've had a lot of success with banks, actually banks, and you know, it seems to be a scrappy bunch who just really want to get outside, and so that's where some of our best corporate volunteer engagement has been. So I don't know if that's been the case elsewhere, if that's just kind of a local quirk, but yeah, Bank of America, Bank of the Sierra, which is very local, have been pretty great about that aspect.
That's a good tip. All right, well, we will go ahead and just close for the afternoon, get us off to lunch at 12. Thank you, all three of you, so much for sharing your expertise and your wisdom that you've learned, and hopefully some good takeaways for folks.